Good morning and good afternoon to you, wherever you may be as you tune in today. And thank you for joining us. For those who have joined us for the first time, this webinar series is focused on HR and workplace topics with a lens of talent, workplace culture, and learning and development. I'm Sonia Sapaban, CEO of OurOffice, where we help organizations with a full suite of products and services for workplace culture and L&D. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Mary Gillen, Senior Director of Learning and Development at Cambria, and Katie Godden, Director of the Learning Effect. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we get into the meat of this conversation, let's make sure you're familiar with some of the logistics. I'm sure these days, most people are familiar with these things, but we use the Zoom webinar tool, and this is an interactive webinar. So please use the chat function to provide your comments and any questions you may have. We have our colleague at our office, Anushka Sarif, who will be moderating the questions in real time and chiming in as needed. So thanks in advance, Anushka. We will answer as many questions as we can throughout, and also afterwards if needed, as long as you provide an email address where we can respond to your question. Also, please note this session is being recorded and will be available after the webinar on our events page at ouroffice.io/events. They're actually quite popular and we get a lot of traffic there. Last but not least, this webinar is approved for SHRM recertification credits. We will share the activity codes later on for those who stay on the webinar. So, Mary and Katie, it's great to have you here. To begin, I'm sure our audience would love to get to know both of you better. Can you please spend a minute or two each introducing yourself and your current role, as well as your background and connection to L&D and the personal experiences that are brought you to this moment in your life and in your career. So Katie, if you can, please spend a minute or two, and then we go to Mary.
Hi everyone, so my name's Katie Godden. Thank you, Sonia, for introducing me. So I'm a director of a company called The Learning Effect. So we're a small learning consultancy based in the UK. I'm sure you can tell by my accent. So I've been in learning and development for about 15 years. So I started off working for a supplier who supplied e-learning content out towards more the educational market. I then moved into the retail space and looked after the technical side of learning there, then moved into FMCG. And then I met my business partner, James, and we realized there was a slight gap in the market where suppliers and internal learning teams weren't really understanding the challenges that each of those were facing. So sometimes what they were inputting into organizations wasn't necessarily working. So we set up the Learning Effect to essentially help learning people do learning. So we help with anything to do with sort of strategy, RFPs, looking at tech, implementing stuff. So all of our customers are bespoke dependent on where they are on that journey. And I think why I like learning is essentially because I like helping people. I didn't go into learning specifically. I fell into learning, which I think a lot of people in learning do. But I really enjoy helping people. I like problem solving. I like looking at different ways of doing that. And the learning industry allows me to do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Mary?
Of course, yeah. So my name is Mary Gillen. I'm based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm the senior director at a family-owned manufacturing organization here. So I do all of the learning and development across our enterprise. So whether it's sales or operations or just your standard corporate, we oversee all of that. We're a small but pretty mighty team here. Similar to Katie, I didn't dream at 8 years old to be in learning and development. I just kind of fell into it. The majority of my career has been in associations. And so what associations do, they train and they coach. And I have always loved that. I love helping people. I love watching them grow professionally and personally, and helping businesses look at things in a different light and understand gaps and how we can fill those gaps. And so I took the leap into corporate world, and I absolutely love it. I learn every aspect of the business, and we look at where they might be struggling and where learning can help. So
Well, thank you so much for the intros. We're excited to have both your backgrounds as we talk about a topic that we've actually broadened it a bit, right? Based on our community input and also the pre-webinar conversation we had with both of you. We had set out to talk about L&D beyond the office. So this would be focused on environments like manufacturing, like you have Mary, and retail, logistics, or caregivers, for example, who are in the field. And I'm sure, for example, Katie, you work with those too, right?
Yeah.
While today we certainly plan to discuss L&D in this environment, we thought it would be fun to go beyond the original topic and cover L&D in all kinds of non-traditional environments as well, because most of all of the net job growth is in non-traditional jobs with the changes over the last few years. So what would it mean when we say non-traditional? Think the Uber driver, the gig freelancer who works with anyone around the world, or non-traditional jobs that have always existed, like seasonal jobs. So any type of employment that really doesn't fit the traditional model of an employee having a single full-time permanent job. In these jobs, people may in fact have more than one job at a time and typically change their jobs more than once a year. A couple of stats just from Harvard Business Review, for example, to start the conversation. About a quarter of workers spend less than a year at their jobs now, at any specific job, right? Freelance and independent work continues to grow faster than traditional employment, and currently represents, at least in the US, about 36% of the American workforce, which is quite an increase from just a few years ago. So given this background, Katie, you work with a lot of people, a lot of different types of organizations. Can you speak to the unique L&D challenges and opportunities that you see beyond the office, and certainly in non-traditional work environments?
Yeah, I think there's a few challenges that it faces because you're not in that kind of traditional environment. I think accessibility is one of the big ones. So it's getting how people access content. If you're from a more traditional background, are you supplying content that's face-to-face? Are you delivering it in a face-to-face way? So how are people going to actually access that? You've also got to think about, in regards to accessibility, time. So when are they going to be able to do that as well? Like you said, lots of people are having more than one job. So if they're perhaps part-time or it's not their only job, when are you actually giving them the ability and the capabilities to be able to then go away and do that? You've got things like global challenges as well. So you're seeing more people, like I work with people over in the US, Australia, etc. We're working more globally. So you've got things like different terminologies, you've got different ways of learning that are all affecting those things because we've got a more kind of diverse workforce, but we've got people all over the place as well. You've got challenges as well that happen, is things like losing your expertise. So if you've got more than one job and you're having to do lots of learning in different places, are you perhaps losing your expertise because you're not learning so much, or you're not in that role and doing it for so long? So there's lots of different challenges. And I think one of the ways around that is that we don't have one record of what we're doing. So we don't own that necessarily. The organization tends to own our learning and our learning records. We don't normally take them with us. So I think that might be something that we can look at in the future. But I think that's one big challenge, that we end up doing lots of the same training because you have to in roles. But perhaps we could think about it in a different way and actually take that away.
I see. That's a really interesting perspective too. And I will say what you say resonates a lot with me. Just in our company, for example, we work with a lot of people beyond our core team who are non-traditional workers, and they're kind of fractional to us. And one of the key challenges, to just add a dimension to what you were saying, is just even knowing what they need at any given time. Usually it takes us some time to learn about them, because they're remote to us. They're doing other things. We don't get all of them all the time, right? So it's a lot slower process for us to get to know them as the employer and to know what they know or what they don't know. And a lot of times it comes up, the way we find out is when something isn't done right, that we can see there's a big gap in the knowledge or the skills or expertise that we might have assumed. So this idea that you get a person, you see them all the time, you are, whether it's even beyond the office, even in the manufacturing floor, you're still, in the traditional sense, you still have a lot of interaction with them, and you get to better understand their needs. I guess it's just a point of view of, how do you even understand the needs for them to be the most effective in their role becomes a real challenge in this environment. So Mary, how do you find out about the learning needs of your employees? Beyond the office, or if you use any non-traditional workforce in your setting?
Yeah, for sure. So we do a lot of discovery. So we're new L&D at our company. We're only about 2 years old. So we've had to do a lot of discovery, and it's understanding the job. What is the job that we're building the training for? And then what is the learner? So it's how can they learn, what's available to them, and then what do they need to be learning to be the most efficient and effective. Because you don't want to spend months and months and months and months training them, and then they might move to a new position or they might move to a new job. It's how can we be the most efficient and the most effective. So we do a lot of discovery work, and it's getting down on our manufacturing line or getting with our sales employees to learn their job, and then talking to managers and senior managers and learning every nuance for us to then put together a profile to say, this is what the job is, this is how the learner is going to learn the best, and this is what we believe their learning path should be to become the most efficient and effective in their role.
And so what learning formats have you found to be most effective for your employees in your mostly like manufacturing environment or sales? I mean, that's a good one that you bring up, sales. That is a big area that people need, like with new products, how does a sales team get up and,
And do that.
educated, about new products?
Yeah, of course. So we've kind of gone all over the place. So for our sales reps, they are spending 4 days of the week in their car. So you can't say, hey, watch all these e-learnings, because that's a safety issue, right? You can't do an e-learning while you're driving. And so it's how can we get in front of them to provide them learning. It's that additional supplemental learning to their initial onboarding. And so what we did was we created a learning podcast. I mean, that's really the best way, right? Is okay, here's an internal learning podcast where we're going to train you about different aspects of the organization. We're going to train you on maybe new design launches or whatever it might be while you're driving in your car so that you're retaining that knowledge. But then you flip over to the manufacturing side, and these are all, hourly workers. They are non-wired, so they aren't sitting at a desk. They don't have a computer readily accessible. And they're hands-on. They don't want to sit in front of a computer, right? They want to use their hands. So to say, hey, we need you to watch all these hours of e-learnings, they're going to check out really instantly. They're going to just do what they have to do to get through them. And so what we do there is it's a blended, and there is that, I call it the first I see, then I do. So first I'm going to watch the process, because you're in a manufacturing plant. It's loud. There's a lot going on. If you're a newbie, it's hard to retain that information. And so we do have an e-learning. We have a learning lab, and they'll go sit there and they learn the different aspects of their role, but it's very gamified. So it's a lot of interaction. It's a lot of, okay, actually press the button or turn the key or do the mixture or whatever it might be. And then we couple them with one-on-one trainers on the floor. So then that trainer can coach them through that process, because in any manufacturing, right, any mistake is some type of lost money. And so you want to eliminate those mistakes. It's the best you can. And that's not to say we don't do a lot of e-learnings. We do, especially within an employee's first 30, 60, 90, you have to, right? Employee history and just software basics, things that they can go back to and reference. So it really just pertains, or it really comes down to just what is that person's job and where are they spending the most time, and how can we get in front of them, because you really have to meet a learner where they're at to get them the learning. You can't force them to always drive towards an LMS or do those varying things, because it's not going to work.
Yeah, that's awesome that you spend so much time just yourself, your team, right? From what I understand, getting to know the work. So you all know it actually quite well.
Yes, yeah.
And so as you do that, actually, one question that comes to mind is how many, on average, and I know this will vary based on specific roles, but on average, or if there's a range, how many hours per year, annually does each employee get in actual learning and development?
Ooh, honestly, it really depends. So I'm just trying to quick calculate in my head now. So if I'm looking at our sales, reps, our sales rep, their initial training is only about 9 hours. It's 40 modules, but it's in total about 9 hours. So we came up with a plan to say, okay, don't sit down in one day and try to crank out 9 hours of e-learnings, but here's how we think you should spread it out over the 6 weeks before then we bring them to an in-person training after their initial 6 weeks. So that's the foundational learning. And so that's about 9 hours. After that, it's really catered to what they want to take. So like I said, we're still new, so we're still just in that process of like, let's build the foundation and the onboarding. And then now we're starting to look at how do we now continue that learning and that education. For operations, it's a little bit longer because when you get into safety, your e-learnings are a lot longer. You got a lot more to cover. So theirs is a little bit longer and really depend on the position. So I would say it can be as little as the 8 hours. It could be more, much more than that. So it's hard to determine, but it really comes down to the job. I would say average though is 8 e-learning hours
Per year.
per year. Yeah. And then, I mean, every year you have your annual things you have to go through, right? Your like harassment training, things like
Yeah.
that. But in their initial learnings, it's about 8 a year. And now we're looking at how do we continue that so that they're continuously growing their skill sets. But you have to be cognizant, like I said, our sales reps aren't sitting in front of computers often, neither are operations. So it is limited time that we have to get in front of them and get them learning.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Any benchmarks that you're aware of, Katie, just in your role in terms of just the best practice, hours per year metric? Is there some kind of a benchmark?
No, I like Mary said, I think it depends on what industry you're in, which role you're in, etc. Like generally you have your inductions. And again, if you're in an office, it's a lot easier to do an induction than when you're in kind of a warehouse environment and stuff like that. So there aren't particular benchmarks into how long people are doing stuff, but generally you have your sort of induction, and then you go into if you need to go through generally kind of levels of your role, kind of next steps into the next role. If you're looking to transition, then obviously extra learnings as well. But again, it all depends on what industry and what roles you're in.
Yeah, I totally. And given that caveat, right, I thought I'd show this. Let me just quickly show this graphic here. This is from a study. It's a 2022 SHRM study that shows for, again, depends on a lot of things, the role, the size of the company, different things, but on average, kind of a third, and a third, how many dollars per employee are spent, right? So when you think about it, even for a small company, it's a substantial investment, right? And this is just, the dollars that they can actually, capture, right? Because there is some other indirect expenses associated with this, but about a third between 500 to 1,000, a third 1,000 to 3,000, and then 30% even over $3,000 per employee per year. So I thought that might, this is just a bit of information that sometimes I'm an engineer, as you know, and I love data. So I'm always, sharing different kinds of data. But no, that's really interesting. So let's talk about, a little bit now that we understand some of the things that you do. How do you, Katie, maybe we can start with you. How do you keep employees motivated and engaged in this idea of continuous learning, right? Because so much is changing all the time now, especially, and so especially if they're like less accessible, working in the field remotely, or some of these non-traditional settings that we described, I hear over and over again that people are, have this training, they do all the great work that you were describing, for example, Mary, and then the employees are, they have to keep reminding them to do the e-learning or attend the course, that they're supposed to attend. I mean, how do you keep them motivated and engaged?
I think you have to go back to the purpose, and yeah, the learning effect, we always kind of roll everything back up to the purpose. If you're providing learning just for the sake of providing it, people don't generally look out to go and do learning. You need to explain that purpose clearly, and so people understand the consequences of not doing it, especially like if you think about health and safety and things like that. why they need to be doing it. If you're talking about financial sales and things like that, again, what the importance is of that. So it's having that purpose and having that clear, so colleagues can actually understand that. But I think Mary sort of mentioned it as well, is having that learning as easy as possible. So you're not spending 9 hours a day on a computer sat in front of e-learning and clicking, because as I'm sure you've all experienced, clicky content's the most boring content and no one takes anything in. Whereas if you're kind of breaking those modules down and you're making it easy to access for people, like Mary said, understanding where people are, what they're doing. So your salespeople, they need to have it on a podcast and an audio version because they're not able to watch things. So you're adapting your content to support your workforce as well. But supporting people in that as well. So where you've got people perhaps working at night times, so they might be shift working, how can we give them still the support that they require? Because your general 9 to 5 office staff might not be there, but you still want them to be able to be included. So if they do have any questions, if they do have any requirements, perhaps you create a community that they can post questions in, so they don't feel so isolated when they are doing their training as well. You can also use things as gamification. So I've done that in the past. So you're kind of incentivizing people going on to do their learning. I'm not necessarily a big advocate of that because I don't think you need to pay people as such to do learning because it's important. But I think it gives, having that area of kind of competition allows people to go on, and you often find, especially in regards to like sales and that sort of environment, people are extremely competitive. They'll go on and they want to be the top of leaderboards. But you've got things like digital badges as well that are coming into it. So you're able to share that onto your social media and things like that, and they're kind of set in stone for you. So I think there's lots of ways around being able to provide that continuous learning and keep people motivated. And I think it's about drip feeding content as well. So it's not overwhelming people. You don't supply them with hundreds of thousands of courses that they can go away and go and do. I think it's providing perhaps a topic each week and drip feeding that content in, so you're keeping it alive and you're able to keep that level of communication up with people as well.
Yeah, I really love this idea of competition and rewards and things like that, right? Everybody wants to excel. I mean, at the end of the day, you also have to measure the effectiveness, right, of this training. We talked to a lot of people who spend a lot of money, as we just showed, on average, people spend, even if they spend $500 per employee per year, that adds up, right? And yet they have no idea how good the training itself is, and which areas, if you have several topics in a period of time that you roll out, what is it that people know more better and they get it right away? And what are the areas that, the gaps where you have to really reinforce? And also, how much did people retain, 3 months later? And we all know that after a week, we forget 80% of everything, just as humans, that's just an average. And then after 30 days, 90% of it, right, is all gone. So, so I guess I'd like to ask Mary, how do you measure the effectiveness of your learning programs for employees, especially beyond the office or in the non-traditional workplaces? What metrics or feedback mechanisms do you use to assess the impact of these programs?
Yeah, I think a lot of L&D professionals will tell you that data and L&D is probably one of the hardest things to grasp and to get a hold of. So especially when you're in the corporate environment, that you have to persuade your stakeholders to give you access to data that typically isn't universally shared. So frankly, with our organization, we're not doing that very robustly. We just haven't gotten to a point where we can say, this is our training, this is our data, this is how we're going to tie them two together. Now, we do your standard feedback loops and your surveys, but that's only going to take you so far. That's going to let you identify maybe some small misses that you're having in there. But we are starting to have those conversations of, we want to see what's our control group, what's our experimental group, and then how are we moving the needle? Are we moving the needle? Are we just totally hitting the miss, hitting the mark on our training here? Because I'm a very data analytical person, and I want to know that like all the work and the hours that my team are putting into something is actually moving. So we can see it small in some areas, specifically in like the operations space, right? We're seeing less incidences in our safety after doing more robust safety certifications, right? We're seeing less incidents, things like that, better training, but we want to look at it more broad scale. So what we do, just to make sure that when someone's coming to us and asking for training, we're not just saying, okay, and we just develop whatever based on maybe what they told us. The question I always ask them right away is, what are we solving for? Because I'm always thinking, what's the end in mind? So when you ask them, what am I solving for? It gets the stakeholder thinking. It also helps you determine, is this a training or a performance issue? Because oftentimes those are interchanged. And so for example, the other day I was having a conversation with our fleet team, and they said, there's a lot of conversations happening with our fleet. We need to create more robust training around fleet. And I asked, okay, well, what are we solving for? Are we having increased incidences, right? Distracted driving, defensive driving? And the answer I got back was no, our teams are actually fine. It's that when they're traveling, our CDL drivers are maybe delivering product to an external partner, they're being put in unsafe environments that we don't want our employees to be under, but they don't feel comfortable saying no, right? So that's a totally different training than just you're like, hey, we're having an increase in distracted. So that at least helps us target it so that we know that, okay, here's our root cause, our issue. So let's develop our training to push that way. And then in the back end, myself and my management team underneath me are working towards how can we start tying data to certain things. But like I mentioned, getting a hold of that data from your stakeholders is very hard. And so you have to make it very convincing. And we do our own selling, right, within L&D to say this is why, because if you can show the impact learning has on an organization, that's why organizations spend so much money on it, because ultimately the goal is to reduce your turnover, to reduce your safety incidences, things like that. So we want to be able to start showing the organization that you've invested in training and here's why. And so now we're connecting those two.
I was just going to follow on from you, Mary. I think
Mhm.
traditionally, in regards to data and L&D, we tend to kind of just look at things like who's done what. So, or
Yep.
how many courses have been completed, how many videos have been watched, and kind of vanity metrics. It doesn't really mean too much because you can go away, you can click a video, it can play, but what have I actually taken away from it? But like you said, in my experience, I've had the same where getting that data back from the business is really difficult, especially when it comes to sales. They don't generally want to give it to you. But when you do get that data and you can make that comparison and you can see that correlation of people doing learning and then their sales improving, it really does help.
Yeah, because we want to look at how quickly are we closing leads, right? And is our leads training helping impact that number? Are we utilizing our software better than we are currently? Are we putting better data into our software, in the sales, and our safety incidences decreasing because we now have more robust safety training? And so that's the kind of stuff we want to look at. But to get your hands on that, it's quite hard. So we have to really sell it and make the case for it. And I think we have a good team here. We have a good data team too. So we're working with them to put those pitches together to start seeing that information so we can show the impact that L&D does have, because it's not like Katie mentioned it. It's not just this is how many courses everyone's doing. And it's not just we need to do training to do training. It needs to have an impact of some kind.
Yeah, and earlier, to your point, earlier this year, we had a webinar that was focused a lot on the measurement and the metrics associated with L&D, and we talked about the Kirkpatrick model, which is quite well known. I'm sure you all are very familiar with it, and the levels of it. And I think what you're talking about is the levels of levels 3 and 4 that are quite elusive, because it really is to the point of the behavior, how the behavior is changing, how the outcomes at the business level are changing. But even, shy of that, I think a lot of people, the kind of assessment they do is kind of opinion. How did you like this training? Do you think the training was useful, right? So I assume you do some of that, just kind of feedback survey, but how helpful is that to you? Do you find it helpful? Does it cost
Yeah.
anything?
Yeah, it is helpful. So I mentioned previously that we bring our new sales employees to our corporate office and we do training. It's a lot of peer-to-peer collaboration. It's meeting with stakeholders in different areas. But what we do with them is a field week roundtable. So okay, you've been in the field for 6 weeks. Just give us some feedback. How was your onboarding? How was all of that? And if you can get them to open up to you, you find out a lot of things. And we're starting to find out that and I think in most organizations where we're falling apart is that onboarding, but it's at when it's not L&D controlling the onboarding, it might be an external, or like it might be a different manager, it's their manager. And so now it opens new doors for us, if that makes sense, of like the information they're giving us, we're looking at it and saying, okay, we could fix that, but now we need to look at our manager training, and we just need to train our managers on why onboarding is so important for your employees and how it does help with retention of knowledge and turnover, and things like that. So in that area, it is helpful. I would like to be able to look at other areas to make sure that like the training we're actually giving them is impacting their day to day, and it does, but I'd also like to see us moving quicker, like getting them boots on the ground in the field a lot quicker than we are right now, but we need some of that more robust data first. But the surveys and just the one-on-one conversations with them does help. It usually opens more doors for us to look at things differently, or look at different avenues of training to help their training at the end.
Yeah, no, and I think, as you say, the one-on-one, kind of having these conversations is very helpful. It's just the scalability of that is hard, right? For large
Exactly.
companies. We work both with small, medium organizations a lot. And of course, their problem is just resources of doing these sorts of things. And then the large companies, their problem is the scale, right? I mean, how do they do that across the 10,000 or 20,000 people that they're trying to train? And to that point, I'll just mention something here that seems relevant. As our panelists know and some of our audience know, for years our company has been focused on inclusion and engagement. We have recently become also focused on the widening gap in the workplace and society as a whole that directly impacts economic inclusion. And a key factor in this economic inclusion is about skills. So we now have an L&D product line that's ideal, really beyond the office, and is tailor-made for non-traditional environments. It's a smart tool. We call it Trivy, with double V, Trivy, to auto-generate and auto-schedule skill assessment and kind of knowledge retention surveys in under a minute. So it's made for busy people. I mean, an element of engagement, as we were talking about how do you engage employees, is people are busy, right? And so to take time away and go and first do a 30-minute or 45-minute or an hour-long training, that's hard. And then to send them, a long survey that's going to take them a long time, to respond to, that takes time. So we've made everything really short. So our trainings that we offer ourselves are 2 to 3 minutes. Nothing is, it's the micro learnings. So, and you can send it to their phone, you can send it to anything. And then the surveys are also just created with AI so that you can create them often enough and create a series of them and just say, hey, create, 3 surveys over the next 3 weeks or 3 months or whatever you like, or 10 surveys. But all the surveys themselves also take less than a minute. These knowledge retention and skill assessment surveys take under a minute to make and to take. So we're pretty excited about that. We've had huge response already, but that's, there's a lot of technology solutions that are coming out. And as we talk about, again, our audience, a lot are small, medium businesses, obviously many also larger companies, but it's a matter of resources, and technology can be very helpful there, right? Because what you can't do in having a big or even a small dedicated L&D team can be made up for a lot of times nowadays with technology. So I want to turn our conversation a little bit into what trends we see emerging in the field of learning and development, especially beyond, the office and non-traditional workplaces. How can organizations better prepare and adapt for, some of the trends that we see, right? There's upskilling, reskilling, all these things also needed because of a lot of, just the fast pace of change these days. So can you speak a little bit, Katie, maybe, and also Maria as well, of course, to some of the trends you see or some of the tools or things that you have found useful that even a small, medium-sized organization can take advantage of?
Yeah, I think AI is the big one. At Learning Tech in London this year and last year, AI seemed to really stand out. I think generally at the moment we're kind of on the content creation stage with AI. I'd like to see it go down to provide more specific and personalized or the capability to provide more specific and personalized content out to people. So they really understand that role. So like you said, if you're working at pace, you need to quickly go on and find something, it's able to do that. If you're perhaps working part-time, you've missed like 2 days because you don't work those 2 days, what do you need to catch up on, etc. So I'd like to see AI do a little bit more for the end user, but I think at the moment it's definitely around that kind of content creation. Obviously you're able to, it gives you a starter for 10 to create content, and you can add your own company specific pieces into there. You can create videos, you can create imagery, etc. As well as kind of looking at some of the themes that I've been hearing as well as in regards to kind of your own logbook. I mentioned it earlier on about having that kind of individual record for yourself, but we've had lots of conversations with people and they want to find out how their individuals can actually own the learning that they're doing. Obviously we're seeing people having more than one job, like we've mentioned, but people are obviously moving between jobs a lot quicker than ever before. So taking those learnings with them is a lot easier if they've got that all in one place, and they've got that ability to kind of showcase that. It's kind of like an online CV essentially. And I think that would be something that would be really helpful for both kind of recruitment, learning, going forward. So yeah, they're the kind of common things that we're seeing at the moment. And then things like digital badges as well becoming more popular, because it's not just a kind of certificate on the wall that you can show people. It's kind of got the blockchain technology that sits in the background. So these are kind of the things that we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing you bring up, because, there was these kind of, online training, as we talk about in the corporate setting, is one thing, but then individuals, taking advantage of these massive learning, platforms, right? That even you can even see, Harvard courses on there, or Stanford, or, some big organizations. There's some really great content on there that's essentially either free or very reasonably priced. And so how do you create an online CV? Do you know of a tool? I mean, since I mentioned one tool, Trivia, we can mention others. Of course, we here want to just, we're really, the way our webinar is really different from, I think a lot of what we see is we're like super focused on what can our audience take away after watching this in real time or afterwards in a recording, to just go out and apply. They can go look for a tool, they can take a specific action, they can measure a specific thing, right? So, feel free if there's anything you'd like to mention in terms of something you've seen that is useful from a content perspective, from assessment perspective, or anything, please feel free. It seems like you were just at a conference that might have, might have things.
Yeah, I was when I was at Learning Tech this year, we represented a company called Tadar. So they're based here in the UK, but they provide that capability of kind of that digital logbook, the badges. So it's kind of for corporates, it's really helpful, but I think we can move into that kind of personalized space as well. So it's definitely a company to watch out for going forward as well. And I think just to add to the technology that I've been looking at recently, I've been looking at a lot of kind of digital adoption systems. So I'm actually implementing one for my American client at the moment, and it's an overlay essentially that sits on top of any kind of websites that you might be using regularly, and it allows you to provide kind of things like tooltips, guides, videos, etc. But they're there already, so you're not having to leave the platform and go and find it. And it also creates PDF guides. So when you're creating these tooltips around the screen, it creates them into a PDF. So if you want to upload that onto Learning Systems, you can do that as well. So that's something that I've been looking at a lot this year. It's not something I'd really explored before because I'm mainly focused on like kind of the learning platform side, but it's definitely a really cool tool.
So what is it? I'm trying to make sure I understand. So what does it specifically do? It's like an extension that you can add
Yeah, so it's an extension that you add to your website. So especially like because a lot of things are kind of online based now. You can put them into your own if you've got your own software as well. You can write code and put it into that. But you can create then like little guides. So you know like the old school paperclip that you had in Word. That's how I describe it. But it's a modern version of that essentially. So if I need to go, look, this is really important. I'm filling something out and I need to make sure that you're doing it correctly. You can put little step-by-step guides. So you're not having to leave the platform and go and reference anything. And you can have it, say, if you're new to the platform, so maybe you're going through an induction, you can have a tour of the system. So it shows you all the key elements. And it knows and recognizes if you've been in there before. So there's lots of digital adoption platforms is what they're called. There's lots out there. It's a really cool piece of technology. And I think it enhances the learning. And like I said, it creates those guides, especially for system specific training. It's really, really useful because you're able to then kind of create the guides off the back of what you're doing and not having to duplicate things.
No, I love
We
that.
actually,
Go ahead.
I was just say we actually have looked at that, Katie, to do that for specifically our like really robust systems and softwares that just take a long time to learn because instead of having that big binder on your desk that you have to flip through or like finding it online to have it like your little paperclip helper, we've looked at that to start utilizing that. And then I was just going to say too, off the AI, I mean, I think whatever size organization you are, AI is something that you could Google whatever you're looking for, and you're going to find an AI company that will help you. And they are relatively inexpensive depending on what we use it. We use it for translation. We translate all of our e-learnings into Spanish, and we did use a translation company, but it is really expensive per e-learning. Where we just started looking around with AI, and AI can do it all at a fraction of the cost. And makes it a lot easier for us internally to get it done. So that is something I think any organization, no matter what size you are, find an AI to help you with it, and it'll be a lot easier.
So we're very excited about AI. It's been across all of our sort of products from the beginning, and especially now with Trivi. But let me ask you, have you seen any? I mean, is there a word of caution? I mean, how would you, as you know, both of you have experience with AI. How do you make sure that, because there is, of course, known things like hallucination, AI can hallucinate and make up stuff. How do you, what are a couple of things people should keep in mind to ask themselves or ask whoever is, the vendor is about the AI when they go about using these products?
Well, you kind of have to train AI. That's what I've learned is when you initially go and start using a platform, it's just your generic, this is what they're going to give you. But as you start giving it feedback or saying, nope, we want to do this versus this, it remembers and it will start tailoring it. But you do have to slowly train it and get very detailed until it understands what you're trying to do every time. So we've used it for storyboards. We needed to generate certain images that we just didn't have. And it took some time to like narrow it down to exactly what we needed. So you do have to train it. Same with our translation. We have someone on staff that's bilingual that has had to go in and kind of finesse words to match what we do here. But then AI remembers that. So it will go. So that part does take time. And I would make sure you're always, when you first start using some type of AI platform, you're double checking everything to make sure that it's working and it's accurate. But over time, as you're training it, it just gets better, and it's kind of scary, but it's awesome at the same time. So
yeah, it's like any technology, right? I mean, there's the stories abound, right, about the early days of industrial days or whatever, where people were afraid of cars, what they could do, the red light laws and things like that. But you make a really good point about making sure and checking it. It's what we refer to as humanize it, because at the end of the day, it's just a tool. You can't just kind of leave any tool onto itself. And what I wanted to mention, which is a really, it just triggered the really good points that you made about, the training and getting better. One thing to be aware of, just because of our roots, which is and always remains being in, inclusion and engagement and equity. We have to say that, if you're using AI for change management, right, you are doing things a certain way and you want to do it a different way. To the point about training, right, if the data you're giving it is all the old way, or in the case of, inclusion and equity, it's the majority of the people, maybe you're training it. There's a lot of stories about AI that's been trained on, for example, the majority being, white male, for example, in an environment. And then how does that work out? It kind of gets trained to be biased, right, towards the preferences or the needs or, whatever goes along with that population on which it has been trained. So there has to be conscious effort in a lot of cases where you have to be sure that is this applicable to all use cases, to all users, different types of users. And so that has to be taken into consideration as well, which I'm sure you're aware of, but just for our audience, as you go to look for that. Katie, any words of caution from yourself, like in terms of
Yeah, I think AI, it's an aid, it's a tool that you have. I wouldn't rely solely on AI. Like you said, some of the things that you kind of warned of, I wouldn't trust to ask it a question and bring me an answer and then just put it out there. I'd want to read it. I'd want to make sure that it makes sense. It's humanized, like you said. And also, I think it's weaving in kind of your organization's culture and things like that. They're the bits that miss, because I think you can tell if something's been written in AI. Like I've read a few things and you can kind of tell the terminology is not quite right. It's a bit off. And it doesn't sound human. So I think you have to understand that it is a tool, and we need to learn how to use that. Like Mary said, it's training it. But it's learning. Like James and I have used it quite a lot. Is learning how to ask the right questions, and how you type that in and giving it the right information so it doesn't go on a really obscure path. But I think it's just act with caution a little bit around it, and making sure that you're reading everything before you post anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. Reading everything
Yeah.
so you understand before you send it out to the world.
Yeah.
But it is, yeah. And I think the source, just to be specific, also what I'd like to add is make sure you know what source data it's using, right? If the sources it has access to all of what's on the internet, basically, then generative AI is unless you force it, right, and you have some processing done, some coding in whatever product you're using that forces it into this, it is built to generate. So it uses, whatever training you give it or whatever source data you give it, and then it can make up stuff, which is this hallucination aspect, right? I mean, it's the case of, a lawyer saying, write me a brief, and then it uses case studies that, case law that sounded perfectly okay to the lawyer, even though he did check it, just like read it, right? But by checking, we mean go check to the source, right?
Yeah.
Our tool, for Trivi, when we bring, here's your survey, here are the right answers, the right answer actually also shows you the paragraph in the source document where it came from. And it's constrained to the documents of just, the company itself or the organization itself, not anything else. It's not actually connected to the internet in general. So it's really a sense of, trust but verify sort of thing, right? To make sure.
There's a tool I know I've heard of it, an AI tool that is kind of not around learning development necessarily, but it's more around recruitment. But it reads like your facial expressions. So people are using it, or companies are using it prior to having face-to-face interviews or interviews online. But I think there was some controversy around can an AI tool actually read human emotions and things like that. So I think you have to take all of those controversies into account as well when you're looking at the right tool for you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I know the one that you're referring to, and some of the issues was like culturally, some people just showing too much emotion or enthusiasm is not part of their culture culturally. So, it was mistaking that some people's like level of interest in the job or something like that. It was giving some data that was not accurate. So those things are, but again, it's just like any technology. I would say, from the day that man came across and discovered fire, you see fire could be used for a lot of good uses, warmth and a lot of industrial uses and so on. It can also be used to, burn down your house. So you got to be conscious of how you're using any technology. Let's continue this conversation a little bit about Now, specific, success stories. We have a few minutes left, and we always like to leave on a high note and with energy, and especially now that we talked a little bit about some of the things to be cautious about with AI. I don't want to leave people with that impression. It is all of this new technology is exciting. All of these changes in general in the world they're all fast. It's all faster and faster paced, and it's all exciting. So let's talk about success stories regarding especially collaboration and action among employees themselves, to enhance each other's learning and development. Do you see that? Do you leverage any social learning or peer-to-peer learning in these environments? And especially for small, medium organizations, and even, at scale for much larger organizations, sometimes there's only so much that, you can kind of like push, top down. But how much can, what kind of environments or tools can you provide that people can learn from each other? It can be more collaborative, it can be social in some ways.
Who do you want to go? Do you want me to go? I'll go first. In one of my previous roles, we actually had a social learning platform. So it was similar to sort of Facebook. And we had to be really careful in order to actually get people learning, because that was the point of it, and not just socialize. So what we did was we sort of created different environments. So we would have a community that was solely to do with learning. So you'd go onto that and you'd find your training. But then we might have a community that they join. So they'd get pushed into that based on their job role. So they would always have access to that. But then they could potentially join one where they've got interests, or one because they're part of that region. So we were creating those environments, and we gave them different levels of interaction capabilities as well. So if it was sort of our evergreen content, we didn't want necessarily everyone to go on and comment underneath it. But if it was our kind of more social, we used it as a comms tool as well. So if it's more the communication side of it, we allowed them to do that. And what we found, because it was a social platform, we had people coming to it every day because they were checking it, similar to how you check things like Facebook and Instagram, because we made it habitual within the organization. We put links out there, so they were having to come to the platform in the first sort of kind of few weeks of using it, because they weren't used to it. We were forcing them to do it, but then we gave them things that they wanted to interact with, and they had that social capabilities. You had those kind of leaderboards, that gamification that brought people back. And I think it's a really cool way of learning. And I think when you've got that visibility of having other people and seeing what they're doing, it encourages you to do that a lot more, rather than seeming like you're isolated when you might not necessarily be.
Yeah, similar to Katie, we had a social platform as well, where we did the same thing. We had, like, there was this generic, but then we'd have more sales centered or more operations centered, and it was more of a communication, a way to push people towards the training to take. But I'm always going to be a big proponent of, if you can have any level of in-person collaboration, training, peer-to-peer, I think that's always the best way to go, especially with leaders. Like, if you're talking about leadership skills or bringing managers together, because it's a good time for them to collaborate. It's a good time for them to share ideas, right? How they're interacting. We do a lot of that specifically around more like HR specific training. If it's like talking about how do we recruit better? How do we hire better? How do we do that? We bring people together, because then you're hearing, okay, I hired someone and this is what I did and it worked really, really well. And then you might grab some ideas, and that's a way to learn and enhance your own skills too. We do a lot of in-person still. We couple it. We do the online and then we do the in-person. We also have mentorship programs, because that's another way just to say, here's another avenue to learn. When you maybe have a quick question or you're just unsure and you don't want to call your manager, call your mentor, and that mentor goes through a whole program that we train them how to be a mentor, and then they go do that and they work with their mentee, and that has shown great success across the organization, just in getting new employees onboarded, making them feel welcome, especially when you're not sitting in a corporate office, right? Maybe you're remote or you're a sales rep and you're in your car all the time. Sometimes you just feel disconnected from the rest of the organization. And so if you can find more people through training or mentorships that you can connect with and collaborate with, I mean, that's always going to have higher engagement levels, higher retention.
No, that's awesome. I really appreciate that. Let me show the for a moment here. I just don't want to forget to do this. The SHRM recertification credit here, the code for it that you can use, the activity code. And then meanwhile, we'll leave this up for a minute or two. And meanwhile, I do want to ask each of you before we run out of time to talk a little bit about, just if there's one or two things you would tell the audience, whoever is watching this now in real time or in the future, that they can do to have a more effective, really a continuous learning program, especially for small, medium organizations, because a lot of times the resources are very scarce, and difficult for them to do that. They don't have big teams, they don't have a lot of budget. So what is the one or two things you would recommend that they could do right after this webinar, or they could focus on at least as an area of focus?
Yeah, I guess I would say always start with that end in mind. Make sure that you're not just creating training to create training because people think that that's what we need. Look for that root cause, understand that it's actually a training and you're solving for the right thing. You have that end in mind. And then the other one is leveraging technology. We're a mid-sized company. We don't have a very large L&D team, and we have a lot of requests coming our way. And so any part that I always tell my team, like, how can we automate it, right? How can we automate that piece? How can we make that more efficient, more effective, so that their time isn't taken doing all those mundane things? If we can automate that, then our time can focus on building those more robust teams. And there's so much technology out there and everything you can try for free. And then if you really like it, I mean, some is really expensive and some isn't. And you just have to kind of get creative in what you have and understand that maybe even the tools you already have, if there is an extension of that you can branch out on and do that. So those would be mine. Leverage technology to try to automate as much as you can so you can focus on the larger projects, and then always be thinking with the end in mind and solve for that root cause so your training is effective and you're not wasting your time or your learners' time.
Yeah, I love that, and I think with technology, what we find is a lot of times people are too busy to try something that might save them a lot of time down the line, right?
Yep.
Or just the fear factor, right? Because sometimes, I mean, I'm tech challenged sometimes myself, and I don't want to try something, but I reach out to my team members that are like our CTO or other people, and I ask them to help me, and make me a little Loom video maybe or something about how to go using it the easiest. And a lot of times, like you say, trying these things is free, and there's tutorials or little things that are available to use them. And Katie, how about yourself? Just one or two things that we can leave with the audience.
Yeah, I think you've got some really good points there, Mary. I was going to say a couple of those, but I'd also leverage the experts within the business as well. So the people that you've got, your SMEs, make sure that, that they can help you as well in creating that training. They're the people that have got the expert knowledge. So train them up, give them the tools, give them the toolkit to be able to go away and create some of that for you as well. So you often find learning teams tend to take everything on themselves. But you need to leverage your experts within your organization, give them the toolkit that they need, and make sure they're able to make sure they're on board, they're your stakeholders, and they can then go away and create that for you as well. And then obviously keep rolling it back to the purpose. You don't just create training, don't give people loads of libraries. They don't work, people won't use them.
Yes, just to get people's attention, right? Attention is at such a premium that it's very difficult to grab people's attention. So I keep telling people, because everybody has this big challenge, right? How do we engage the audience, right? The audience engagement in terms of anything you send people, right? Whether it's content or an assessment or anything, is really the hardest thing. And I always say, but put yourself in their shoes, right? I mean, this is the one thing I would leave with everybody is, start with the end goal, the organizational goal, obviously use technology, engage your experts, and then put yourself in the, in the place of the learners. What is it? Why should they care? I think we said this earlier. Why should they care? Why it's important for them? And then how can you make it a little bit of fun? Because at the end of the day, the world is just, our lives are too much full of serious stuff, and maybe we could just have a little bit more fun. So how can you add something to that to personalize it? I think you said personalization too earlier, Katie, I think that's a big thing as well. But listen, we've talked about a lot of things. This has been hugely, I've learned a lot. I really appreciate your time for being here. Thank you for doing everything you're doing at L&D. And I look forward to talking to you more in the future. Thank you to the audience. And please, I mean, if anybody wants to get in touch either with Katie or Mary, certainly we can make that happen. Just let us know, drop us a note, and we'll be in touch with everyone. I look forward to the next one. Thank you again. Really appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.